Okay, so I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'm hoping to get you all out of here a little bit early. I realize it's the end of the day on the last day of the conference, so I really appreciate you showing up. Um, by a show of hands, who here works on data projects, either as a data practitioner or as a product manager? Most of you. Awesome. Double hands, Chris. Good job. Okay. So I'm Alice Albrecht. I lead the strategy and advising portion for Cloudera's Fast Forward Labs. And at the very end, if we have time, I will tell you a little bit about what we do. But just to get started, I wanted to go through, there we go. A couple of the ways that we think about machine learning and data science. So a lot of the organizations, if you listen to the news cycle or if you talk to people at cocktail parties, think that everybody is out using AI and it's going to be amazing. You're going to put AI in everything. The reality, as most of you probably know, is that a lot of organizations are at the point where they've gotten clean data into their platform, they've started to do analytics really well, and they've built some machine learning models. Their data science team is up and humming. But most organizations are not doing data science machine learning at scale. They don't have hundreds of models into production. And so a lot of the way that we think about this is helping people to scale this pyramid here as they move along and gain the capabilities to have data in their organization. So another clear tenet of our group is that we're trying to cut through the hype of machine learning. We want to make it boring. If you've seen any of our other talks, we do this in multiple ways. Today, I'm going to talk about trying to bring data into the fold of the rest of the organization as really this underlying current that you don't really even think about anymore. So you don't have just one person that's an excellent machine learning person in your organization. So how do we move from these fairly expensive, bespoke proof of concept machine learning models, maybe having a couple of them in production, to having data be an integral part of the way we think about planning businesses 3 to 5 years out? As I said, I lead the strategy portion of our business. Strategy is a complicated subject. I'm not going to get into a ton of that today. It involves people and technology and market forces, and it's really specific to each individual company. What I do hope that everyone in this room can walk away with today is an appreciation for how we can take single data projects and start to build data project portfolios in a smarter way that really integrates with the business and eventually drives the business strategy itself forward. This framework, just so we are clear, is not just for Fortune 500 companies, although those are some of our clients. It does work well for any stage company. It could be a fledgling startup, all the way to these huge monoliths. Okay, so let's dive in. The first step in this process is to get the right people in the room. And when I say the right people, I don't mean the smartest people in your company. I don't mean the people that are data engineers or machine learning engineers and know all of the cool things that we can do with data and they're going to make this amazing product. What I mean is literally somebody from every function in the company, if it's possible, or representing that function. People at differing levels of technical capabilities and imagination in terms of product, and people that are of different seniority levels. Getting the widest net here is really going to pay off in spades when you start actually working through this framework. So what we see a lot of people stop with is they have an ideation session and then they look at the goals of their company and they just try to stick those projects onto the goals in their own company. This is completely fake, so don't worry about the sticky notes here. These are not real projects. That is actually a path and a failure mode in our mind. So if you are throwing away ideas that could be new directions for your company, or you're working on projects only that align with your current goals, you're going to get stuck in a rut with this stuff. So let's move from super high level into a completely fictitious world. I made up a fake use case for this talk so that we could all be on the same sort of level playing field here. So I made a fake media aggregation company in my mind. That company takes news articles and aggregates them, and they have a very slick layout, but their user interface is kind of buggy, and they are worried about competing with others like Medium, if you use that as a place to read articles. And they think that machine learning has something to do with the way that they're going to beat the competition. So I've outlined a couple of very vague business problems here that we see a lot. So people are calling them too often because their app is very buggy. Their users can't find new content, and they're having trouble aggregating content that they already have. And I put together a couple of high-level goals. You could insert your own company's goals here. But it's to decrease the customer service costs, so decrease that cost of acquisition, increase the number of users that they have, and increase the time spent in the app. So just try to remember these, and I'll overlay them later. So I did the mental gymnastics of coming up with a bunch of project ideas based on this. And so this is what I talk about when I say get the right people in the room. You want a really wide range of project ideas. You want some that are maybe obvious. Automating call center routing might be something that you could do fairly easily. And you want others that are less obvious and less in the same vein of the things you've been working on or seem less possible. So maybe summarizing the customer's feedback. I, for this demonstration, would say you need to cut the things that are completely infeasible. So one of the ideas that I put up here originally was self-driving business. It's not going to happen. So go ahead and get rid of those, but try to keep as much as you can otherwise. So then what we do is we take the different project ideas and we plot them. We are data people. But these axes here are cost. And when we think about cost here, we're not just talking about the cost to deploy the model. We're talking about the cost to develop the model. We're also implicitly here talking about the risk that's inherent in all of these projects. So you may work on a project for a year or two, and that project may never make it to production, and that's okay. That is the very nature of data projects. So we encourage everyone to think about cost in multiple different facets, so GPUs, people's time, and experimental risk. Impact, similarly, can have multiple different meanings here. You could have things that impact the way that you run your business day to day. That's very meaningful impact. You can have things that also impact your customers or your clients. And that's a little bit of a different way of thinking about impact. And if those two pieces of your business are very different, then you could ostensibly cut this into two separate graphs. So we've got our projects here. We've got them plotted. You can argue with me later about where they are in terms of cost and impact. It is a fake company. So another sort of easy way out here that is a failure mode is to say, great, we've plotted this. This looks like actual data. Let's take this bottom right quadrant here. We'll take the things that cost the least and have the most impact, and then we're done. This is a way to lose a lot of the richness in what I'm about to show you, and is definitely not something we recommend doing. Another obvious shortcut here would be to say, let's just do the cheapest things. We don't really need to invest in data until we see a return on our investment anyway, so let's just take the projects that are the lowest cost, and then let's bang those out and see what we can get. This is also a failure mode. What we actually recommend is something a little bit more nuanced. So what we recommend is that you look at your projects and you start to draw lines between those projects on this chart. And those lines mean that those projects are related to each other in terms of the underlying technology that you're going to build for those projects, the learnings you're going to have from experimenting with those different types of projects, or the data you're ingesting for those different types of projects. And the important point here is that you are building a portfolio. I've talked about risk here, and I'm talking about these projects building on each other over time. So when you think about building a call routing algorithm, what you're really doing is setting yourself up to build these later projects that are going to be high value for your organization. So here, I hope you can see the linkages between these projects that I've completely made up here. So this is all well and good, and you could just take these projects and say, great, we've got projects that build on each other now. Let's just start building things. But we do encourage you to try to tie this back to your company's goals. So if you'll remember a few slides ago, I talked about the fake company goal of decreasing customer service costs. So we can see here that a couple of these actually align with that goal, and that's wonderful. And a couple of these that are linked actually align with that goal. Great. But some of these aren't necessarily going to align with those goals. So doubling the number of users, none of this is obviously going to get you to that place. But if you follow these lines and you follow these groupings, you can see that you may be able to come up with new project ideas from this framework that will get you to that goal. So never assume that because it doesn't align with your goals, you shouldn't do it. The other caveat here is that not all things are data projects. So you shouldn't try to make every goal that you have for a company something you solve with data. Although we do want it to underlie things, you don't need to force yourself into that. Okay. And so others will actually align with your business goals, but they don't necessarily build on each other, and that's okay too. You're all very smart people in this room. When I get to the very end phase of bringing this all together, you'll see that you have to do still some prioritization with these. And finally, this is probably my favorite category when going through these exercises. You can find things that don't align with your current goals. They may not be obvious to do for whatever reason, but they may be a new direction for that company. So we talked about this fake company that I made up at the beginning, and they have this news aggregation app, and they're not sure how they're going to compete. But we all know that filter bubbles are an important thing, and people are talking about them a lot. So if you could build some sort of detector for this with all of the data that you have in-house, that might be a new direction for your organization that's worth exploring from this phase. All right. So bringing it all together now in the same graph, we can see that a lot of these projects on here are ones that either aligned with our goals, had projects that built on each other, or gave us new ideas. This depiction here is not going to have the full space of ideas that you come up with your team, obviously. But we can see that we've been able to rule out things that are obviously not going to align with any of those patterns. So scheduling meetings was not one that made the cut here. There's actually a completely separate company that builds this, so that is a buy decision, if you've seen X.AI. So here I've put these into phases. You can do this any way that makes sense for your organization, and that's where we get back to startups versus Fortune 500 companies, people with different resources and risk tolerance levels. And so for each of the phases, though, that we go through, we recommend having that blended level of risk. So you want some projects that are going to be farther out and more experimental. You want some that are going to give you quicker wins, and you want them to be building on each other in a meaningful way here. Okay. So step one, get all of the people in the right room. This is just a recap. We're almost done, folks. And step two is to go through this frameworking exercise. And step three is hopefully you have a profitable, healthy portfolio of data projects that you're building over time. And this is an iterative process. So we recommend people go through this at least quarterly with their organization. And as you have new projects that come in that enable other projects, you can sort of see how this might evolve over time. So finally, as promised, our group does this with lots and lots of clients. We do strategy engagements, which cover multiple different areas, including people, process, and use case refinement and technology. We build machine learning applications, and we do advising and research. So one of the implausible projects I showed you earlier was a summarization project, so summarizing news articles. That's actually a bit of research we've done within our group and published on. So at this point, I'm happy to take questions and facilitate discussion if people would like. Yeah. Oh, it might help. Can you hear? Oh, no, you. Yeah, to the mic.
Sorry, I said there is another one. So do you oversee this engagement from the end to end, from the initial actually like discovery or this framework phase to the implementation phase and business results? And if yes, do you map somehow like to predict business KPIs or business metrics at the very beginning and then compare them with actual results that you occurred after this machine learning model or whenever it says implemented in the production?
Yeah, and that is that's a good way later to look at the cost and the benefit of this. So as you do this and you start building these more intentionally, it should be like any other product you're building or you're building into a product. So we do recommend you have KPIs. We don't recommend that those be firm in the same way you would for maybe another product in your organization. Because these things, by their very nature, as I said, are really experimental. So if something does work and get into production, then you can come back to this and say, okay, this is what I invested in this project, and here is the return I got. How is my portfolio doing? And you can look at that over time. Those are long scale, sort of lagging metrics, though. So we recommend people sort of check in along the way and see, is this really going to have the benefit I think it's going to have as I get farther down the road? Any other questions?
From your experience, from past experience consulting other companies, so what is the typical duration for data projects? Could you say just an average number, like 9 months or around a year, more than a year?
It varies based on their capability too. So if it's a company's first time doing any kind of data science and machine learning, it's a long time. It can be years before something actually gets into production. If somebody has a working, what we like to call it, AI factory, then it could be, as short as a couple of weeks. So it really depends on the sort of how ambitious the project is, and then whether the company has any sort of machinery in place to get these through. So yeah, it's really variable. Anybody else? Yep.
So how long do you usually take for prioritizing your use cases? Because I've experienced myself in doing that. It's quite complex sometimes to do the cost and benefit estimation.
Yeah. So the cost piece is interesting, and that's where it gets more complicated to actually build this chart itself. I say these are all in relation to each other, and so I'm not coming back and saying, hey, you predicted this was going to cost, let's say, $100,000 to build, but it really cost you $150,000. Like, you put it in the wrong place on there. So the graph here, as much as I love graphs, is really meant to have a relational feel to it. So I don't encourage people to spend tons and tons of time trying to predict how much it's going to cost, because that can be hard. You should have an idea, though. And so you should have an idea, how much in terms of resources you're going to need and about how long it's going to take you to build this based on your capabilities. Okay, I'm going to let everyone go. Thank you for coming to this very last session. I'm around afterwards if you have questions.